This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. This review covers the X or YB-35 Flying Wing Bomber. It's a 1/72 scale kit from AMT number 8615. The X or YB-35, built by Northrop Aviation, was the concept that Jack Northrop developed back in the 30s. Now, detailed engineering began in early 1942 with a crew of 9, and as designed, it would carry a payload of up to 52,000 pounds of ordnance. The first test flight was in June of '46, but there were real problems with vibration from the contra-rotating props, and eventually they changed those into just 4 standard blade props for the YB version. Now, the only prototype ever flown eventually lost out to the B-36 bomber. Nevertheless, this plane became the basis for the current B-2 stealth bomber by Northrop Grumman. The kit itself was released in 1995 and contains 120 parts. 5 of those are clear parts, but not all of them are needed for either version. And it has 90 decals on the sheet with 64 just for the props. When you're done with the kit, it'll be about 10 inches long, 29 inches wide, and about 4 inches high at the tips of the props. Here are the decals for the kit. As you can see, the large ones are for the plane, and all those small ones go on the props. So these are shown after they've been bleached out in a window by the sun for a while, and we'll talk about that later. Examination of the kit's parts revealed that there is some flash. As you see it here, it's mostly in the sprue trees, but mostly it's a pretty well detailed kit. A lot of the items, however, are molded in. You can see all the piping and work done here that's already there for detailing. Started the build by spraying the clear parts with some floor polish by various names, originally Future, and then set them aside under cover to keep them from getting any dust on them. And after a while, before those are installed, I'll spray them again and give it a good coating to keep any fumes from hazing them. And here are those decals prior to bleaching by placing them in direct sunlight for a week. And it's not so much you're concerned about the yellowing of the items themselves, although sometimes the white parts can do that. But it's the carrier film around the decals. Now, it's pretty difficult to cut all of those little decals out right around the decal and cut out the carrier film. So you try to bleach them out the best you can and get them to return to a white color, or I should say a clear color. The instructions call out an unpainted aluminum for the interior surfaces, and these were prototypes, so that's probably right. And I sprayed all the cockpit parts then using some non-buffing aluminum. The gun sights were given a little dot of kind of a translucent green to represent what they might be seeing in that periscope. And the seat cushions have a red color, kind of like the B-36, mostly just for artistic flair. This is an old mold design, and as you see here, an ejector pin mark. You'll have to deal with things like that and clean them up to your satisfaction. And so here you see the assembled cockpit area, and all the pieces fit together pretty well. It's pretty bare bones. It's just highlighted. Now, some of the sidewall decals got picked out in black, yellow, and red, and I painted, as I mentioned, the seat cushions red just for color. Now, a decal gets provided for the instrument panel, but the size isn't even close to the panel size, so it produced too much glare when facing the camera. So I kind of showing you the back sides of it. Once it was fixed into place and dry, it was a simple matter to use the X-Acto knife and trim away the excess. Next, I glued the nacelle halves together and painted the prop tips flat white, followed by a coat of flat yellow from Tamiya paints, and the tire halves were also glued together. The seams were cleaned up,
painted tire black, and while the wheels were painted with tire black, the hubs then were painted with aluminum color. Next, I glued the cockpit up forward and the rear gunner's positions into place and their locations into the lower wing center section. And then the upper wing can be used to dry fit for any fit issues. It did look like there was maybe one with a tab here of the plastic shown by the arrow in the photo. A quick dry fit of the canopy glass for this section proved that there wouldn't be any significant issues, and the seams visible on the front of the wings will be hidden by the one-piece leading edge that will be added later. My solution here was to cut that tab off. I think that may have been a tooling issue, and I found another tab that seemed to interfere with the fit. I'm not sure, if those are correct or not, but I think maybe. Anyway, I just cut them off and glued the halves together and clamped them later. The main components placed together for dry fit. I found that there was a fit problem where there's a step between the outer wing section and the fuselage or center section, and it's on top of the wing if the bottom is kept even, and reversed if the top is kept even. So the kit has a wing spar, like a piece that glues to the lower fuselage section, that helps keep the lower outer wing piece even, but it doesn't seem to help the step on the upper wing at all. So I attached some 30 thousandths thick plastic strip to the upper portion of the wing, and this kind of forces the outer wing section upwards, eliminating the step. Seeing that it was going to take some work to fix those fit issues, I decided to take a break and finish the prop blades by masking each yellow tip, painting the rest of it a black. And since the prop spinners were going to be painted aluminum, I sprayed that area black as well. I applied some of the decals to the props. The yellowing showed up right away, obviously a problem. So I looked for some replacement decals, but I couldn't find any. And so this is kind of tricky. Number 6 decals I took, and I got the decals loose from the backing paper, and then with a lot of water around on the decal, I turned the decal over and lightly brushed away the decal's carrier film glue. And once this was done, I could place the decal on the prop blade, and after it was fixed in place with some future, because that was needed, when I had gotten rid of the yellow, all the adhesive was gone, of course. It worked fine for the Hamilton standard emblems, but didn't help with the lettering. Those are decals number 8. So in the end, I only used the Hamilton standard emblem decals. Well, with everything taped together for a dry fit, I decided to go ahead and put the ailerons in, and you can see they're laying on the nacelles there. And so I added the props and the ailerons to the wings and attached the landing gear using a little bit of that poster putty. Now, once everything was attached and the model was sitting on the bench, it was time to start adding some weight so that I could, check for a tail drag. And so I added like 2 large fishing sinkers and some solid core solder, and packed it in there until I got a good balance and it didn't tip backwards. Once the nose weight issue had been resolved, the fuselage could be closed up and the outer wing sections added. Once these were dry, I added the ailerons and the engine pods, as well as the wing leading edge pieces. At that point, another alignment issue presented itself, and the exhaust sections molded on the wings didn't line up with the corresponding parts on the wing's leading edge. So now for the real fun, we could start filling and sanding all the seams. My favorite putty is a perfect plastic putty. It cleans up with water and thins with water. So I usually thin it out and apply it to the seam and then let it dry for maybe 90 minutes and come back and add another coat if needed until it's got enough height to take and cover the seam. And while taking a break from all that sanding, I looked a little at the instructions, and then with that info, I painted the inside of the wheel wells green zinc chromate, even though it said that all the interior surfaces were plain aluminum, but that's just standard. Once the putty gets dried, you can start sanding with a kind of a coarse sanding stick or paper, because a lot of the plastic has to be removed to eliminate the steps on the wings and on the leading edge pieces where it joins the wings. It's a matter of using finer and finer sandpaper until your scratches are sanded out. At this point, I gave it a wipe down with a tack cloth and rubbed it down with some isopropyl alcohol to remove anything that was on it, fingerprints, etc. I then masked off the wheel wells in the cockpit areas, and then the entire model was painted gloss black with some Model Master Gloss Black spray. After the gloss black was thoroughly dried, I sprayed 2 light coats of Alclad 2 aluminum. And when this had cured, I was able to mask a few panels and paint them with some dull aluminum to kind of vary the overall color. I did misalign the edge on one panel and had to go back and do it again. You'll find that happens. And overall, I was happy with the effect, but it's obvious there are issues with the seams that would have taken a really long time and a lot of putty to fix. I know this looks kind of grayish, but it's actually a drab green, interior green, and I'd use some artistic license there to, paint the interior of the wheel wells. I assume that the color changes just because of shadowing and inappropriate color differentiation through the camera. Now I had decided to work on the landing gear, and as you can see, they're pretty much 2 colors, an aluminum and a tire black. They're actually kind of a nice and detailed representation, and they're beefy enough to support the model. But they go together very easily, and you're going to find some ejector pin tabs on them if you want to clean those up. And while fitting the landing gear, I noticed that the landing gear bay was larger than the bay doors that I had painted earlier. And you can see 1/2 of that shown here. And note the green, that's what it's supposed to look like, despite that grayish photo from earlier. Looking things over again, I noticed that the reason why the bays are bigger than that other door panel is because there are 4 doors for the landing gear bays, and I hadn't noticed that. So I also noticed that on some of the other parts, the ejector pin marks are pretty deep, and I thought I'd show you another way to take care of those. I bought an old set of Waldron punches a long time ago. You can use them to punch out thin circles of flash and thin materials. And so what I do is just punch out a couple of the appropriate sized discs from some either thin sheet or even some of the flash from the kit, and glue those into position, and then sand those down after after they're dry. Well, I came to realize that although I thought these were simple exhaust vents, they're simply exit holes for the actual engine pylon, so that there are parts that protrude from there that fit into these holes. So when they were all test fitted, I painted them with some burnt iron and then glued them into position. And I find sometimes you have to make a careful reread of the instructions when you're dealing with unconventional aircraft or any subject matter for that part, to help get you really acclimated to understanding how this model is built. Next, I turn my attention to the canopies, and where I can, I like to use the commercial masks that are available. But in this case, I was quite surprised when I found that New Wear masks made just that for this kit. It was a Czech company, but they are no longer in business. And the grid pattern on the masks is just a result of there being a shortage of regular paper that's used for it. I thought it might be more difficult to use because it's hard to see those after separating them, but it's not a factor. The 1 millimeter grid pattern actually turned out to be somewhat beneficial, though, because the mask is applied to the canopy with a 1 millimeter space along the bottom edge of it. And so that helps, you line it up for leaving room for the canopy frame there. So when masking canopies, also I fill the inside with, a good ball of blue tack to help prevent cracking it when pressing on it. Use some canopy masking glue or crystal clear, anyway, at least a white glue to secure the canopies and bubbles into position. I noticed that the wheels had some flats put on them to show off the weighting, and once the canopies had been dried, I turned the unit over and was happy to see that you could put the landing gear doors into position quickly as the legs fit right into the supports, and the Y-shaped unit helps stabilize it and straightens it right up. Once the landing gear had dried, I went about installing the props, and they're a simple install just as the instructions show. And then I proceeded to finish up with the decals, and there's really not many decals for the plane itself because, well, this was a prototype, and it just lent itself to a few of those kinds of insignia, etc., that you would have to see on an Air Force, even a prototype. And once again, having to use the kit supplied decals, I had to turn some of them over and wash away the yellowed effect, and then use some floor polish to glue them into position. But all in all, I think they came out pretty well. They were at least strong enough to withstand that kind of activity, and I was kind of impressed with some of them. Clear enough to read like the fuel capacity at 3,000 gallons on some of the stickers there. Now here, again, I wish there was another set, but you may have to do something like this or print your own if you want some better decals than what's packed into these 40-year-old kits. While I was laying those decals down, I found that a little microsol and microset applications were good enough to make them nestle onto the features there and look more appropriate. And then I followed that up with another coat of the floor polish. I've got 4 bottles of Future, and that'll last me quite a while. Well, there you have it. This model kit is done, and this classic kit can still be found at online auctions and in some hobby shops too, old line ones. And as you see here for scale, a smaller fighter here, a 172 scale P-47, which is the same scale, but now you can see how big this thing is. In fact, you'll need a large bench for a 29-inch wingspan just to work on it. But it's going to require a lot of work if you want to make a real contest effort out of it, especially that leading edge and the mismatches. They'll need quite a bit of putty and time, and you'll also need to rescribe the panel lines after that. So there you have it. If I were you, and if you can find one, I'd build this kit. Although you can look for the Italeri, the version that was released in 2008, and at least the decals would be newer. So nonetheless, I hope you'll find one, buy it, and put it on your shelf. Well, we hope you like this step-by-step classic model kit build and review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right hand of any of our reviews, or you can find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.